Hello and welcome to the Thriving Abroad podcast. I'm Louise Wiles, an expat and transition coach, and your host for these conversations where we share stories, strategies, tips, and tricks to help you build a thriving international life. Have you moved abroad to support your partner's career? If so, this is a conversation for you. Over the years, I have met many expat partners, as well as being one myself. And our story often goes, our partner comes home from work one day and says, I've been offered a great opportunity for a new role. The only possible problem is it's abroad. After much discussion, the decision is made to take this great opportunity. There's excitement, anticipation, mixed with a certain trepidation. We plan, we prepare, and then we say goodbye to friends, families, jobs, and colleagues and move abroad. The first weeks and months are busy in terms of settling in, adjusting, getting to know the area, meeting new people, and generally finding our feet. Our partners are busy settling into their new role and often travelling a fair bit too. Life settles into a new routine and everyone tells us you're so lucky. Friends and family visit. And some of us are really fulfilled with this new life. Around 30% according to the research. For others, there's a nagging feeling that there is something missing. And the partner begins to wonder, well, what's in it for me? In episode 68, last week's episode, Louise Ross spoke about Eric, an expat partner who realised that when he moved internationally for the second time, he would really have to find something for himself and make that a priority. And this is something that my guest today, Margaret Ghielmetti, recognises only too well. Excited to live internationally and fulfil a lifelong dream of travel and adventure, Margaret was excited to embark on her first international relocation with her husband. But as the first move morphed into the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and so on, Margaret increasingly asked the question, well, what about me? Listen as Margaret shares her amazing story, her insights, and what she learned from her exciting international adventure through 9 international moves. As always, you can go to the blog post associated with this podcast episode, look for episode 69, and there you'll find the transcript if you prefer to read. And while you're there, please sign up for my regular Thriving Abroad newsletter. Then we can keep in touch and I can keep you up to date with all the latest Thriving Abroad news. Enjoy the conversation. So hello and welcome to this Thriving Abroad conversation, and I'm really excited today to welcome Margaret to the conversation. Hi Margaret.
Hi Louise, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So Margaret is sitting in Switzerland right at this moment,
yes.
Is that right? Yes. And I'm speaking to you, as always, from the UK. I always think it's really nice to know where we are sat in the global sense as we're talking. So paint that picture for everyone. So Margaret, just tell us a little bit about your expat journey and so what led you to have the mobile lifestyle or life that you have had and led you to write the book that you wrote, which we're going to talk a bit about during our conversation today.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I really love what you're doing with Thriving Abroad, so I really appreciate you including me. What led me to my expat journey was my husband's career. I had been a traveler since I could travel, really. My mom always said I was born with one foot at home and one foot exploring the world. So I was always inherently someone really interested in the world, but would have probably been happy being a traveler until I met my Swiss husband. I'm from Chicago originally, and he had already lived overseas, and it was really important to him. He loves to be inside of a culture. And so when his company, which was at the time Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts, asked us, would we move to Egypt? I said yes. It helped that I have my college degree is in Arabic and French. So it was really fulfilling a dream for me. And then subsequent to we moved from Chicago to New York, to Paris, to Cairo, to Sharm el-Sheikh, to Chiang Mai, to Bangkok, to Chicago, to Singapore, to Chicago. So that's our journey. And it really was an extraordinary thing. But it did start out because I wanted to be open-minded to the notion of being inside a different culture as opposed to just visiting it. And then to your second part of the question, why I wrote the book Bravish, Memoir of a Recovering Perfectionist, it was after, and I don't want to get too political, but after a certain presidential election where I felt that my country, the United States, that there was a certain pressure that the other was bad. The other was bad. And my experience living on 4 continents and visiting almost 50 countries is the world is not my enemy. I would never have learned what I learned if I hadn't lived in all these different places. I wouldn't have met all the amazing people I met if I hadn't traveled there. So I started out by thinking, I'm going to share my traveler's tales. And as I started to write, the book morphed into not only my physical journey, but my emotional journey, starting out as a trailing spouse and then finding my own creative voice again as the years went on.
Okay, well, we'll get into talking about that in a minute. But I was really struck by your description of your life as you relocated for your partner's career. On the one hand, you're really excited for new adventures, and that really comes through in the book, your passion for the location and for investigating the culture and really enjoying living in that culture. But then on the other, there were challenges raised by the whole sort of question of transition and the changes that came with that, from both personally and professionally. So can you share some of the challenges that sort of front of mind, or that really sort of resonated with you over that time and with all those different transitions?
Absolutely. I think the biggest challenge for me was I quit my job when I was 40 in 2000 to follow my husband's career. And it was intentional, and I don't have any regrets, but I had been working about 200% in sales and customer service for many years by then. So all of a sudden I found myself without a professional identity. And really what happened was, as opposed to taking the time, I didn't have the capacity to do this, to take the time to figure out what I wanted to do. I started to throw myself into other roles. To be the best expatriate, to be the best corporate spouse, to be the best hostess to the world. And I really, nature abhors a vacuum. That was a big challenge for me, that I didn't know how to create my own life at that point. So that was very challenging. I would say I only realized quite recently, actually, that some places made it difficult for me to be the perfect expat, because I really don't like to admit that. I don't like to admit that. And I really never want anyone to think poorly of another place or another people. But it was very challenging in ways that I wasn't expecting it to be. There were some things culturally that I thought, I'm going to be completely fine with this. Speak languages, I'm multicultural, I'm super flexible. Yeah, well, it was still super challenging. So I think the other big challenge was just not knowing what I was in for. I thought I had it handled, and I didn't have it handled.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? So our belief about our openness could actually be a challenge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For me, it was a matter of some of those attributes that are really things that I consider great for someone who likes to travel and live abroad, but in excess, as you say, I think they're good qualities to have, to be open, but it's good to also know what our limits are. And I didn't know what my limits were. I just always was a glass half full person. And I was completely blindsided by the fact that sometimes I was very lonely and very bewildered. So a lot of loneliness and bewildered that I was not expecting at all. So I was blindsided by my own, as you say, some of the attributes. I went in all guns blazing, and yikes, it caught me by surprise.
And I do think that, you moved so many times, number one, so there was so much change going on there, but also the way in which you moved. I think at one point you talk in your book, and you say, I think when you moved to Egypt, you had 1 week,
right?
Or you gave yourself 1 week to settle down, and then the next move you gave yourself a month.
Exactly.
And I can relate to that, because I remember when we moved to Madrid, my first move, I thought, well, within a month I'll be settled in, I'll have made all these friends,
Right.
and it will all be lovely and easy. And by 3 months I'll speak Spanish fluently. And no, that didn't happen. And all I can say is I think you definitely live and learn as an expat, most definitely.
Exactly.
But I'd also say the nature of the way in which you moved probably was a challenge in that respect, because your husband was immediately into a very demanding, time intensive role, wasn't he? So
that's very true. That's very true. And we've had some conversations about that subsequently, once I found my voice, because it's true. My husband, Patrick, would, and he's the first one to admit that. He said, I know it was much easier for me because he would arrive at a Four Seasons hotel, be whisked away, and I would rarely see him again because it's a 24/7 kind of business. And it was a really immediate sort of thing. I do think also only later on in our moving career did Four Seasons start to do things like giving people an orientation session, which I found hugely helpful. And to your point, only later in our career did I start to realize it wasn't going to happen in a week, that I was going to be fluent in Thai or any language. And what I really realized is I want one person that I can have a coffee with and have an intelligent, kind conversation. I really shifted my focus from exactly what you described to I'm going to be fluent and I'm going to have a host of friends and I'm going to be completely comfortable, to realizing, oh, I know what's really important to me, and that is having one friend and, some other acquaintances. So I did definitely evolve over 20 years of moves, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's a really valuable message to anyone just moving for the first time, finding that one connection point and having someone to ask questions of, but also to have that connection and friendship with. It is so important. And there are so many ways. I often say to people, you can start this before you ever leave by, we're so fortunate now. When I first moved to Madrid, there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram. There was, I couldn't find those connections. And so I ended up doing it 7-8 months in and going, okay, I'm not going to do this on my own. I'm going to have to join one of the international women's groups, which I kind of resolutely tried not to join, because I had this vision of me just seamlessly integrating into Spanish life. But
exactly,
you live and learn.
Right. Totally agree. And I must say that's probably one of the big pieces of advice, and I know you're going to ask that later, but I do join the women's group immediately. And then I'm really careful about what I participate in. Since I'm a writer, for me, the key is always the book group, because I know I'm going to have genuine conversations with people. I can really be myself and talk about something that matters for me. There are other parts of women's groups that don't interest me as much, but I've learned to really jump in. And in fact, when we moved back to Chicago, my hometown, before we arrived, I joined the International Women's Group there, even in my hometown, because I needed to be with other people who have a broader vision. I needed to be with women who understand that the world does not stop at our county lines. So that I totally agree with you. That's something I learned along the way too. Join the women's group.
Yes, because you're joining groups of like-minded people who have similar experiences, and every time I've moved up, so after I moved from Madrid, I moved to Lisbon, and there I did immediately join International Women in Portugal. I'll give that a push because I know it still exists as a group, and it was just a lifesaver. And like you, chose the groups I wanted to be involved in, and it just it kick-started that whole social side of life and gave me something to focus on in those early weeks and months. And actually, just before we move on, just one other point I want to make to anyone listening who's embarking on a relocation right now, and this whole point of arriving and settling in. I think so often companies are so keen that the employee gets right into work and right on with the job. But if there is any way the employee can influence that and give you as partners or family, if you've got kids going to, 3 or 4 days or a week to settle and orientate yourselves, I think that is just so important.
I completely agree. And also to be with our partners in this new setting, because as difficult as it has been, each move has been one of the highlights of my life. I mean, I really wouldn't trade. I don't care how hard it was. I wouldn't trade a second of it, but I would have loved a little bit of time with my husband just to say, wow, look at us. We're in fill in the blanks. And just to experience that together as a couple, as opposed to immediately being kind of ripped off into these different directions. So I completely agree with you. If companies could see an orientation tour and a couple days, just let the family or the couple go, gosh, look at us. We're in someplace really special. I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Yes, because it's, I mean, people talk about onboarding to a job. I hate the word onboarding, but, you know, companies will give that time. But I think there is, you know, scope or a need to onboard you or be onboarded to the new life, or onboard yourself, however it's going to happen. But just to be given time to work a few things out yourself and develop some new routines, and especially with kids. I've definitely, you know, to have that time with kids to work out, okay, where's school, how are we going to get from home to school, where do we go to buy, you know, what we like to eat, so that we all have some familiarity about our day to day, that then just eases everyone into, you know, the new life in that place. So
I totally agree. And I did want to mention on that, since my husband and I were not blessed with children, a lot of people who did not have this lifestyle have said to me, oh, it was so much easier for you to move without kids. And I'm not sure that that's true. On a logistics level, for sure it was true. But to not have the social setting of the other parents' groups and the schools and whatnot. So that's just a note to anyone who's doing this without children. I hear you. Contact me, because I know it's a different kind of journey to not have that immediate sort of enveloping, for better or worse, school situation with kids. I totally get what you're saying. As a parent, it must be very nice. I want to know where my kids are. I want to know their school. I want my partner to see that too.
Yeah. I totally agree with that, because I moved without kids. You know, the first 2 moves, no kids. So that's when I learned, you know, that I needed to find these clubs in order to make, because otherwise I was on my own. It was, you know, I remember my first 5 or 6 months in Madrid. The first 2 or 3, I just couldn't believe how lucky I was not having to get up and go to my job, which I hadn't really been enjoying every day. I could go to my Spanish language lessons and the gym and walk around Madrid and, you know, do my thing. And I loved it. But then suddenly I realized, you know, actually, Louise, you're actually quite isolated. I think probably at the end of that first sort of cycle of language lessons, and the students, a lot of them were younger than me, but they were doing kind of a term lessons at the university, and I just joined in with them. They all went home again, and I was suddenly, now I need to start again. And without kids, it's very difficult. The kids certainly have given me structure later on, you know, as we moved in, and a way of making friends, definitely. So that kind of brings me on to kind of, you know, a lot of our listeners are expat partners. So they've moved because of their employees' jobs, and so they're going to relate to a lot of the challenges we're talking to. And I've, you know, in previous podcasts, I've talked with other people about how this experience can lead to an existential crisis in terms of, you know, what am I going to do with my life, and how am I going to take sort of my professional life forward? And is that something that you can relate to? Is that something that you found yourself asking yourself questions about as you moved around?
100%. 100. And in fact, that's really what my book is all about, was going in thinking, just what you said with the Spanish lessons. I finally have time to write what we call the great American novel. And I had my turquoise blue journal, and I would go to the cafe, and quickly, because of the existential sort of the void of not knowing who I was anymore, really without a business card, as I say, I started to really fill in the void with other things. I put off the book because it was easier for me to get a quick payoff from being really a people pleaser. And I could fill in some emotional gaps really quickly. So when I was feeling lost existentially without a career, I filled that in by being the perfect wife, the perfect corporate entertainer, the perfect mover, I put a lot of perfect roles in there which really got me far away from what I said I wanted to do. So it was a huge existential crisis, which I didn't recognize at the time. Of course, hindsight is 2020. I see that now, but I was putting a lot of things in to keep that existential void at bay. I don't want to get too philosophical, but I really think it's a big issue for people to suddenly find themselves in a situation where we're not exactly sure who we are, where we belong. It became clear to me that I was no longer 100% a Chicagoan. I was no longer 100%. I was somehow, my roots were different. So on a lot of levels, I think it's really can be very destabilizing for people. So yes, I relate to that 100%.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when I think back also to my time, and I think, you know, I had kids. So I worked when I was in Madrid, then moved to Lisbon and studied, and then became pregnant with my first daughter, and then we had children. And I can totally relate to that. So you were the perfect wife, do it in everything you did, and I kind of filled my void by being the perfect mum in a way. And I still have that playing back to me now, because I built my own self-esteem around how I do everything, you know, for the family and for the kids. Right. And now I try to combine both. And you know, and I can, it's still, and I can see why I did it. And when I read that, you know, as I was reading a book, I was reflecting on that part of my life and thinking, oh, is that what I was doing? Kind of, rather than, you know, I made up this story around how I don't have time to work full time, 9 to 5. And, you know, so I had my business and built my business and thriving abroad around it. Okay, so I do have a professional focus, and that's growing now. My kids are growing up, so I have much more time now. But whilst they were younger and we were still moving, that really did take up a lot of my time. I know in your book you talk about, you know, settling into new locations and the time it takes and the transition and you know, and that's kind of a distraction from the blue book and writing and going to the cafe. And I can see parallels.
Thank you for seeing me.
So what's the if other people are listening and they're thinking, oh my goodness, perhaps this is what's happening to me, and I'm doing something similar, what would your advice be to them?
Wow, my advice would be to try to get really honest with ourselves, and try to see what payoffs we're willing to let go of. Because what you just said, being the perfect mom, or me being the perfect corporate spouse, there was a very strong payoff. So I kept saying I wanted to do one thing, but I kept doing another thing because the payoff was really, really strong. It was only when I got really honest with the fact that I really wanted something else. I didn't want to just be the perfect fill in the blank everything. I really wanted to refine my creative expression. The shift happened then when it became really clear to me, oh, I want something more than I want the status quo. I'm willing to sacrifice. You know, I talk about taking off the crown and the angel wings and the superwoman cape and all the stuff that I had layered on, because it felt really good. It felt really good to have people say, oh my gosh, you're so brave and you've moved around the world and you're such a great daughter and blah, blah, blah. And I treasured all of those roles, but I knew that I was tricking myself if I didn't at some point say, the clock is ticking. What do I want to do? I also think I got a lot more honest in my conversations with my husband to say, I'm crazy about him. I support him 100%, but I needed to create my own life. And I needed his support to remind me when I was slipping into old behavior, because he can tell when I'm filling in the void by, she's sliding back into old roles. So it helped me to enlist him, and he's been a very fierce advocate. And I know that's come at a price for him. He jokes about it. He's like, why on earth did I tell you to put yourself first, Margaret? You know, what kind of idiot does that? So I'm grateful to him. And to get more honest with my friends and my family, because even now reading my book, people are telling me, I had no idea you were struggling. And I'm like, because I didn't tell you. So I would get I would hope for people that they could get a lot more honest with themselves and think, gosh, what do I want?
What do I really want from this? Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to say, and I'm just thinking back to some research I did back in 2012, where we had a lot of expat partners talk about careers. We asked questions about how their careers had played out in the face of international relocation as a partner, and what they really wanted and had those wants being realised. And some, about 78% said they wanted a career of some sort, but the 22% said they didn't. And I do remember one person's reaction, which was really strong, and saying, I kind of even resent a survey like this, because you're implying to me that I should want something more, and I'm perfectly happy with what I have. So I just want to say to anyone listening to this going, I don't recognise this, and I am perfectly happy, that's absolutely fine. Absolutely. We're not trying to say that you should be anything, but just recognising that, a lot of people, and at different stages of your life as well, there have been times when I've been perfectly happy to be focused totally on the kids and home, and I've made that as an active choice. But I suppose that's the point, isn't it?
Exactly.
You're making an active, conscious choice about how you're spending your life, and being really intentional about that, because that's the other thing I've learned, is that time zooms by when you're when you're living your life in those chunks of time, 2 years here, 3 years there, 1 year here. Time just goes, because you spend so much time preparing to moving, settling in, and then another year's gone, and then another year, and suddenly you're looking back and saying, gosh, that's 5 years gone, and my intention was, but I didn't actually ever get to that. So it's about being clear about intentions, I think.
And I completely agree with you. I have I'm not at all invested in if people want X, Y, or Z. But what my wish for people is that exactly what you said, that they get in touch with what their own want is, what their own intention is. Because as you say, otherwise we just get caught up in this sort of stream of events and moves. So if that's what they want, more power to them. I just wish for people that they, just what you said, that they have intention about what that person wants.
Yeah. And I guess it doesn't have to be a professional intention. It can be personal. It can be, how am I going to spend my time, and what do I want to be focusing on? And if it's not career, that doesn't resonate, doesn't have any attraction, that's fine. If you have the support you need to not need that, then what is it you want to do personally? Where is your intention there?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that kind of links into my next question, which was that you talk about midlife being a transformative time. So I don't know whether you're meaning that this all led to this transformative midlife time, or whether you had all the transformation through the transitions, but then also another round around the transformation. If you get the question.
I think it's really a matter of timing. I'm always grateful. I say I have earned this silver hair. So a lot of stuff, we really have to live it to learn from it. So I think I know it's been a transformational time for me. For a number of reasons. I mean, I really love personal growth. I love working with coaches like you. I love reading books like your book. I love learning from people. And it's a cumulative effect of then transformation for me has taken place. I do think, I can only speak for myself, that the transformation started to happen after I had enough experiences to have kind of a critical mass where I could see, okay, I want things to be different than they were the first few times.
So gradually things built up to the point where
it was time.
It was time. The tipping point.
A tipping point, exactly.
A tipping point,
exactly.
And I guess many of us will experience that in different times. And people also talk about, different transition times in life. So, often people will talk about the transition when you make that first choice around career and whose career leads, and perhaps if people have children, that prompts that first transition time. But then the next one is often around, somebody's having a doubt about career, perhaps both partners, one partner needing a new direction or thinking they want a new direction. And so then there's another transition. So, and then later on in life, as children leave home and empty nesters, you have then, a whole other set of questions around
Absolutely.
filling. So I can see how those come about. Yeah.
And I think a lot of my transformation perhaps came when I was starting to care for my parents at the end of their lives. So living in Singapore, but my parents in Chicago, it kind of forced the question. I was grateful to be able to get on airplanes. I'm grateful for the existence of airplanes. I hope we can get back to them soon, because it allowed me to go back and be participative in their care. But that was definitely a very transformative time for me. It focused things very, very firmly. I mean, it really, the sense of the passage of time and sort of what was I waiting for to live my own life. So I, as you say, as a parent, I'm sure the empty nest experience, having children and then having them leave, there are definitely some sort of crucible moments where I think each of us is forced into a transformation. And that was probably one of the biggest ones for me, was seeing, oh gosh, this really, the clock is ticking in ways that maybe I didn't want to see before. Yeah.
Well, and I think we all kind of live through, not everyone, because obviously everyone's life and, age of parents and illnesses and so on differ, but those points arise and they cause you to reflect, don't they, and flip back on. And I think particularly when you're an expat and you're having to cope with those kind of challenges from a distance as well, that kind of makes it even more pertinent, doesn't it? Because you're having to plan your life around trips back, and and that can be really challenging. So I would like to ask this question, because hindsight is a wonderful thing. So if you were sort of looking back on your international journey and all that you've experienced and learned through it, what would your advice to your younger self be about embarking on this international adventure, and how you would approach it, or suggest your younger self approached it?
I would say ask for help. Ask for help from every possible human being that you can reach out to. That was definitely the mistake I made. I had to learn how to ask for help and how to accept help. And that happened during my expatriate journey. As I say, I really thought I had it. So why would I ask for help? I didn't want to bother people. People want to be bothered. People really want to help. I mean, I'm ecstatic when a new expatriate asks me, or if there's any way I can be helpful. And I wish I had known that. I wish I had known ask for help, because I did all the reading I could, but just like you, there weren't Facebook groups. There weren't a lot of the networks that are now. So I love to try to create those, and made an effort to create those, but it's a lot easier now. There is help out there. So for me, it's for sure ask for help and accept help.
Yeah. And I guess with that comes that kind of vulnerability, doesn't it? And don't mind being a little bit vulnerable, because I think we all want to seem as though we're capable and coping.
Right.
And we will have our challenges.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing about sort of expat groups, and perhaps that's how, that they have really increased in numbers in recent years, I think, and because of social media too. And you see a lot more sharing and a lot more honesty about the experience than probably we saw or even heard 10, 15 years ago. I remember when I first started working in this area, people would say, oh, in the expat groups, no one actually talks about feeling unhappy, because that, they don't know whether the boss of their husband or partner
Exactly.
is sitting across the table, so they just don't actually admit. And it was only in small intimate groups that people would start to open up. But I think that's beginning to change a bit. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that. Thank you for being a part of that, because I really think it will make things a lot easier for people. I mean, I'm not a big fan of, I love to dip into the pity pool when I'm feeling really sad or low. I put the bubbles in the pity pool. I take in a book. I take in a cup of coffee. And then once, the bubbles dissipate and the water's getting cold, it's time for me to come out. So I don't spend a lot of time, but I do think it's really important to be honest. And as you say, that really does take some vulnerability. I've never once had any one person say to me, you shouldn't be so honest. You shouldn't be asking for help. You should shut that down. I do genuinely think people want to care. It's up to me to give people the opportunity to be helpful. And I love that there are resources out there.
Yeah. And I think the important thing to say with that, I love the image of the pity pool. But part of living well is also, struggle in life is a part of life, and I think sometimes when we move abroad, we think we're going to leave that struggle behind. I don't know why. You have that vision of this perfect new location where everything is going to be, as we would dream it and expect it to be. And then when we find that it's not, or when we find just that we struggle emotionally, which of course we do at various points, that life is full of ups and downs. And I think perhaps that's something we're all learning at the moment with the pandemic, that we're all struggling at various points, and perhaps we're being a bit more open about that, which is perhaps one positive that's coming from this painful experience.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think probably we're coming to the end of the conversation, and I don't know whether you have another point to add to this. I mean, you've shared so many sort of great ideas that, but I just wanted to ask what your number one tip for thriving abroad would be, if you had one top tip. Is there anything else?
As much as I say ask for help, I really do say to new expats, grow where you're planted. I do think it's really important to share our honest feelings, but I also really think it's important for people to give whatever place it is a fair shake. It's not going to be exactly like my hometown. It's not going to be exactly the foods. And that to me is very exciting. That's something I really cherish, but I know for other people it's more challenging. And so I've said to a number of people, this is where you're planted for now. So I don't mean to sound harsh, but try to grow in that soil. Try to see what it can offer. I mean, as I've said, I would trade a few minutes. I was going to say I wouldn't trade a minute. I would trade a few minutes on this journey, but I really think it's more a matter of people keeping an open mind about a different place, a different culture. It's been life-changing for me. But that's what I tend to say to people, or ask that of them. Yes.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I remember Evelyn Simpson, who I co-authored my book with, she always said that when they moved to a new location, she moved through many locations because her husband, he worked for a multinational, so they were moved quite frequently. And they had this rule that in the new location, neither of them were allowed to talk about wanting to leave for 1 year. So they had to, they would give everywhere 1 year. I mean, it doesn't mean they couldn't complain a bit, but they would give it 1 year and really try to make it work. And then after 1 year, if it was kind of really still not good, and I don't think I think after that, they stayed everywhere past 1 year, for the duration of whatever assignment they'd been given. But I just thought that was quite a good idea. They set your mind on trying to make this work and finding a way to make it work.
Yes.
And asking for help as well.
I agree with that. And I also think not comparing. I do find the people who suffer the most are often comparing the destination with, it's not like either like home, true, or like a previous posting, true. Or I do think it really helps if people can try to go in, start from zero, and try to be open-minded about it and see what it has to offer.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Fantastic. Great tips there. So if people would like to find your book, where can they go? And if they want to learn more about you, do you have a website that they can come and find out more about you?
Absolutely. It's www, and it's my first name and last name. So Margaret Ghielmetti. That's MargaretGhielmetti .com. So there are several of my storytelling stories on there, which some of them are my travel misadventures because I do a lot of live lit storytelling. My Instagram photos, I love to be in touch with people who love Instagram because that's how I share the beauty of the world. And yes, there are links to my book. I've got my book launch coming up. It's virtual, it's free on October 1st with Women and Children First. And I have other book events coming up, but I'm very grateful. Anyone who wants to be in touch, and I have a contact page there. So if anyone has questions or wants to be in touch, I would love that. That's connection and community are the most important things to me.
Brilliant.
I appreciate you asking.
Fantastic. Well, I will put all those links on the blog post at thrivingbroad.com that accompanies this episode. So go and have a look for those there if you want to see them in written form. And also I'll link to your book as well.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Margaret.
Me too. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And thank you so much for listening. Remember to access the links and the full transcript from this conversation. Go to thrivingabroad.com, click on the podcast tab and look for episode 69. You can access the blog post associated with this episode, and there you'll find the link to the full transcript. And also, while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to receive the regular Thriving Abroad newsletter so that I can keep you up to date with all the latest podcast and Thriving Abroad news. Thank you once again to Margaret for joining us today. And remember, you can go to her website to learn more about her and purchase her book, Bravish, to learn more about her international journey. I'll be back soon with the next episode in the Thriving Abroad podcast series. Meanwhile, take care and stay well wherever you are. Bye-bye.